The Mexican desert stretches for miles, an endless expanse of dust, heat waves distorting the horizon. Nestled between craggy mountains and thorny cacti, an isolated airstrip hums with quiet activity. This isn't an ordinary airfield. It's a cartel stronghold, a lifeline for Emilio Vargas's drug empire. Planes land and take off at night, ferrying bricks of cocaine and crates of stolen weapons across the border. The men who run this operation are cold, ruthless, and completely without fear. And at the top of it all, a man whose name sends chills through the underworld. Not just a kingpin, a visionary, a warlord in a tailored suit. He built his empire through brutality and deception, and now he's looking to expand his reach. For Emilio, this airstrip is more than a smuggling hub. It's power, control, wealth, and anyone who stands in his way doesn't stand for long. A C-130 Hercules rumbles down the airstrip, its weathered fuselage glinting under the sun. The engines roar, kicking up clouds of dust before it rolls to a stop. The hatch groans open, and stepping down onto the dirt is Frank "Hawk" Reynolds. To the untrained eye, he's just an old man. Gray hair, sun-worn skin, eyes that seem tired. He moves slowly, deliberately, like a man who has seen his fair share of years. A few younger cartel recruits snicker. What's an old-timer like him doing flying in cartel territory? But the older men, the ones who know war when they see it, don't laugh. A man whose name sends chills through the underworld. Not just a kingpin, a visionary, a warlord in a tailored suit. Emilio Vargas has constructed his empire through a relentless combination of brutality and deception, weaving a web of fear that ensnares anyone who dares to challenge him. His reputation is built on bloodshed, and whispers of his ruthless tactics echo through the dark corners of the cartel world. As he looks down the runway, a gleam of ambition lights his eyes. He's always searching for ways to expand his reach, to solidify his control over the narcotics trade that fuels his empire. For Emilio, this airstrip is more than a mere smuggling hub. It's power, control, wealth. It represents his dominance over the criminal underworld, a vital artery through which the lifeblood of his operations flows. Each landing and takeoff symbolizes a transaction in a game of life and death, where fortunes are made and lives are lost in the blink of an eye. Anyone who stands in his way, be they rival gang members, law enforcement, or hapless cargo pilots, doesn't stand for long. Emilio ensures that threats are swiftly neutralized, often in the most brutal of fashions, reminding everyone of his unyielding grip on the reins of power. As the sun beats down on the arid airstrip, a C-130 Hercules rumbles down the runway, its weathered fuselage glinting like a relic from another era. The massive aircraft is a reminder of the past, of conflicts fought, battles won, and the lives intertwined with its flight path. Its engines roar to life, kicking up clouds of dust that swirl around it like specters of forgotten soldiers, swirling in the hot air before it rolls to a stop. The hatch groans open, revealing the interior of the aircraft. Stepping down onto the dirt is Frank "Hawk" Reynolds, a name once revered among his peers, now just a distant echo in the annals of aviation history. To the untrained eye, he appears to be just an old man, grey hair tousled by the wind, sun-worn skin mapping out the years he has lived, and eyes that seem tired, as if the weight of the world rests heavily upon them. He moves slowly, deliberately, like a man who has seen his fair share of years and carries the ghosts of his past with him. Nearby, a few younger Cartel recruits snicker, their laughter echoing through the dry air. "What's an old-timer like him doing flying in Cartel territory?" one scoffs, their ignorance painted across their smug faces. They see Frank as an easy target, a relic of a bygone era, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. But the older men, the ones who have walked the battlefield and know war when they see it, don't laugh. They recognize the quiet intensity in Frank's posture, the way he carries himself with an air of confidence that belies his appearance. These men have seen the aftermath of conflict, the blood-soaked ground, and the shattered lives left in its wake. They understand that beneath the surface of this seemingly harmless old pilot lies a reservoir of experience and skill that could spell doom for anyone who underestimates him. Frank's eyes scan the airstrip, taking in every detail, every movement. He feels the weight of the cartel's presence pressing down on him, the tension thick in the air. There's a palpable sense of danger, a silent understanding that the stakes have never been higher. Despite his outwardly frail appearance, Frank knows he's stepped into a world fraught with peril, a game played by men who do not play fair. And as he walks toward the awaiting ground crew, he can't shake the feeling that this encounter will be more than just another routine cargo flight. The air is charged with anticipation, and Frank can sense that the calm before the storm is about to be shattered. He takes a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment, letting the familiar smell of aviation fuel and dust fill his lungs. This is where he feels alive, behind the controls of an aircraft, soaring through the skies. But today, the skies seem darker, the winds more treacherous. Today, he will need more than just his flying skills. He will need the cunning and instincts of a soldier, the heart of a fighter, and the resolve of a man who has survived countless battles. As he approaches the crew, he hears whispers among the younger recruits, doubt and mockery laced into their tones. But Frank remains unfazed. He's faced tougher adversaries than petty criminals, and knows the only thing more dangerous than an enemy is an enemy who underestimates you. Rumors swirl about Frank. Some say he's a washed-up veteran, just another burned-out pilot looking for one last paycheck. Others whisper a different story, that once upon a time, he flew through hell and back, that during the Vietnam War, he piloted rescue missions so dangerous, no sane man would take them, that to his enemies, he was known as the Angel of Death. Frank doesn't care about the whispers. He just unloads his cargo, his calm demeanor masking a sharp mind that sees everything. His plane is his lifeline, an old but meticulously maintained C-130, a relic from a different era. It's the last piece of his past that he still holds on to. Watching from a distance, Emilio Vargas smirks. To him, Frank is an easy mark, an old man running cargo for hire, unaware of the storm coming his way. Men like him, Emilio says, swirling a glass of tequila, they break easy. He turns to his right-hand man, Miguel El Lobo Santiago, a ruthless enforcer with a wolf's smile and a killer's instincts. But men like Frank Reynolds, they don't break. They bend, they adapt, they survive. Frank has seen too much, lived too long, and buried too many ghosts to be shaken by cartel thugs who think power comes from money and fear. Still, he plays the part. He moves methodically, unloading crates from his C-130, his posture loose, almost lazy. But beneath the surface, He's measuring every detail, the number of guards, their weapons, the way they position themselves. They think they're hunting him. They have no idea. Emilio leans back in his chair, watching through a pair of binoculars. He's seen men like Frank before, old dogs with too much pride, too much history. They always think they can outmaneuver the new generation. Emilio takes another sip of tequila. He enjoys breaking them. Miguel, standing at his side, doesn't share his boss's confidence. He's not like the others. Miguel mutters, arms crossed. Something about him. Emilio scoffs. Please. He's an aging pilot with a bad back. Do you really think he's a threat? Miguel doesn't answer right away. He's learned to trust his instincts, and right now, his instincts are screaming. You ever hear the stories? Miguel finally says. Emilio laughs. Stories. Miguel's jaw tightens. They call him the Angel of Death. Emilio rolls his eyes. Dramatic nonsense. Miguel doesn't look convinced. He's seen something in Frank's eyes. Something cold. Something familiar. Frank finishes his work, wiping his hands on an old rag. He feels the eyes on him. He's been hunted before. As a young man, he flew through combat zones, evading SAMs and machine gun fire, rescuing soldiers no one else would. Death had knocked on his door so many times, he stopped answering. And now it's knocking again. He exhales slowly, rolling his shoulders. The C-130's engines whine softly behind him, the heat of the tarmac rising in waves. Frank isn't afraid. He's ready. Bring him in, Emilio commands, setting his glass down. Make him see reason. Miguel hesitates. And if he doesn't? Emilio smirks. Then make him beg. Miguel doesn't argue. He just nods, already making plans. Because if Frank Reynolds is really the Angel of Death, then Miguel Santiago is going to clip his wings. Bring him in, Emilio commands. Make him see reason. Miguel doesn't need to ask what happens if Frank refuses. Frank is just about to leave when he notices the shift in the air. A few cartel soldiers linger too long, their hands resting near their holstered pistols. Then, Miguel steps forward. Senor Reynolds, he says, flashing a wolfish grin. A moment of your time. Frank turns, face unreadable to Frank's gut tightens. He's seen this play before. The fake smile, the casual stance that's anything but relaxed. Miguel isn't here to talk. Still, Frank doesn't flinch. He tugs on his worn leather jacket, playing it cool. Something on your mind, kid? Miguel chuckles, but there's no humor in it. Emilio wants a word. You know how he gets when people waste his time. Soldiers inch closer. Subtle. Not subtle enough. Frank tilts his head. That right. Funny. I don't recall signing up for a performance review. Miguel's grin widens. He enjoys this part. The slow build-up before the violence. Frank has seconds to decide. Go with them. No chance. Once he's in their hands, he's as good as dead. His eyes flick to the alley just past the cantina, 10 yards away. If he can make it there, he has a chance. But first, a distraction. Frank exhales sharply. All right, he says, raising his hands in mock surrender. No need for theatrics. Miguel nods. pleased, right before Frank moves. Fast, precise, brutal. His elbow slams into Miguel's nose, cartilage crunches, blood spurts. Miguel stumbles back, cursing. Frank doesn't hesitate. He's already moving. His boot connects with the nearest soldier's knee. A sickening pop, a scream. Another reaches for his gun. Too slow. Frank grabs the man's wrist, twists hard, snap. The pistol drops. 2 down. Too many left. Gunfire erupts. Frank dives into the alley, sprinting. Bullets chew into the walls behind him. He needs an exit. Up ahead, a fire escape. Frank jumps, catching the bottom rung. His injured shoulder screams in protest, but he hauls himself up. Miguel shouts from below, "You're a dead man, viejo." Frank doesn't stop. He never stops. He reaches the rooftop, breath steady despite the chase. They think they can corner him. They have no idea. Frank isn't the prey. He's the hunter. Miguel gestures toward a secluded hangar, where a table is set up with a bottle of whiskey and a briefcase full of cash. A simple proposition, Miguel says smoothly. You fly for us, and we make you very, very rich. Frank doesn't blink. I don't fly for devils, he says, his voice even. The room stiffens. A few younger cartel men grip their weapons, but Miguel laughs softly. No need for bravado, viejo. He leans in slightly. You'll fly for us, one way or another. Frank meets his gaze, unflinching. Then I guess I'll see you in hell, kid. Miguel's smile falters just a little. As Frank walks away, he knows this isn't over. The night air is cool, but Frank's mind is burning with suspicion. Something is coming. He felt it in Miguel's tone, in the way Emilio watched him. But Frank is not a man who panics. Back at his small home near the airstrip, he sits at his workbench, polishing an old military knife, a blade that's seen more battles than most men ever will. His eyes drift to a framed photo on the wall, a younger version of himself, standing beside a Black Hawk helicopter riddled with bullet holes. He exhales slowly. He knows trouble is coming, and when it does, they'll wish they never came for him. Frank's next flight is supposed to be routine. The dusty, scorching airstrip stretches beneath him as he prepares to land his old C-130 Hercules after a supply run. But something feels off. His instincts, honed by decades of flying in war zones, whisper a warning. Before he can react, 2 black SUVs tear across the runway, skidding to a stop in front of him. Armed men in tactical vests pour out, weapons drawn. Frank grips the controls, heart steady, but his options are slim. Frank doesn't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed. He keeps one hand on the throttle, the other flicking switches with practiced precision. His mind is already calculating speed, angles, weight, distance. The C-130 isn't built for quick takeoffs, but he's done crazier things with less. The SUVs block the runway, and the men move with lethal coordination, not cartel grunts. No, these are trained professionals. Mercenaries, government, someone with a lot of money and a lot of pull. Frank exhales. He's been burned before. He won't let it happen again. The radio crackles. Emilio's voice, smug and mocking. Step out of the plane, viejo. No need to make this difficult. Frank smirks. Difficult is what he does best. His hand tightens on the throttle. One move. One shot. That's all he'll get. Instead of shutting the engines down, he pushes them, full power. The C-130 roars, tires screeching against the asphalt. Dust and debris kick up, blinding the approaching gunmen. They hesitate. A fatal mistake. Frank yanks the yoke back, forcing the heavy aircraft into an impossible takeoff. The Hercules lurches forward, barely skimming the roof of one of the SUVs. Gunfire erupts, bullets pinging against the fuselage, but Frank doesn't flinch. He's flown through worse. As the aircraft climbs, a missile alert blares across his instruments. They have a launcher. Frank curses under his breath, yanking the controls hard left. A second too late. The explosion rocks the plane, ripping through the left wing. Warning lights flash red, alarms screaming in his ears. But Frank just grits his teeth. He's crashed before. He's survived before. They want to bring him down? Fine. They better pray they killed him. Because if they didn't, he's coming back. A voice crackles over the radio. Miguel, El Lobo Santiago. Land the plane. Viejo. Now. Frank frowns. He could try to take off, outrun them in the sky. But a quick glance at the fuel gauge tells him he won't get far. He lands. As soon as the wheels touch down, the men storm the cockpit, dragging him out. They zip-tie his hands behind his back and shove him into an SUV. They drive him to a hidden cartel-controlled airstrip, deep in the jungle. When they yank him from the car, Emilio Vargas is waiting, a cold smirk on his face. Frank Reynolds. You're either about to become a very rich man, or a very dead one. Frank doesn't blink. He knows what's coming. You're gonna fly for us. Emilio continues. Drugs, weapons, money, across the border. You refuse, you die. The armed men tighten their grip on their rifles, waiting. The jungle heat is suffocating, but Frank remains calm, unreadable. I don't fly for devils, Frank says, voice even. Miguel steps forward. His hand hovering over his pistol, Miguel studies Frank. His expression unreadable. There's no fear in the old man's eyes. No pleading. No hesitation. Just cold defiance. Miguel has seen a lot of men break under Emilio's threats. Politicians, cops, even rival cartel leaders. But Frank, he stands there like a monument, unmoved, unimpressed. You don't fly for devils? Emilio repeats, amused. He steps closer. His cologne thick in the air, mixing with the damp jungle heat. Tell me, Frank, what do you think happens next? Frank doesn't answer. He already knows. Torture, starvation, or maybe a bullet to the back of the head. None of it scares him. Emilio sighs, shaking his head. You know, I really hoped we could do this the easy way. Miguel steps forward, cracking his knuckles. But before he can touch Frank, the old pilot smirks. You boys sure you want to do this? Frank asks, his tone almost amused. Because if you lay a hand on me, I promise you, one way or another, you won't live to regret it. The arrogance makes Emilio laugh. You're outnumbered, viejo. Frank's smile doesn't fade. Am I? Miguel's instincts scream at him. Something is wrong. Then, boom. An explosion rocks the jungle, shaking the ground beneath them. Emilio stumbles, cursing. His men whip around, weapons raised. Frank grins. The cartel's airstrip is in chaos. Fire erupts from a fuel truck, sending plumes of black smoke into the sky. Miguel spins around. What the? Gunfire. Sharp, precise. Not a wild spray of bullets, but controlled, tactical shots. Emilio's men start dropping, one by one. Frank doesn't even flinch. He knew this moment would come, and he prepared. The cartel made a mistake. They thought Frank was alone. They didn't know about Ghost Team, ex-special forces, mercenaries, brothers in arms who owed Frank their lives. And now, from the trees, camouflaged figures emerge, night vision goggles glowing like phantom eyes. They move like shadows, sweeping through the cartel guards with ruthless precision. Miguel barely has time to react before a rifle but slams into the back of his head. He crumples. Emilio stares in horror as his empire burns around him. His men are dead or fleeing. And Frank steps forward, rolling his shoulders. Zip ties still on his wrists. "I told you," he says coolly. "I don't fly for devils." Emilio reaches for his gun. A sniper's bullet takes out his knee. He drops, screaming. Frank crouches beside him, voice low. "But I do fly for ghosts. And then, you'll fly for us, old man. One way or another." Frank looks from Emilio to Miguel, as if considering the offer. "You're asking a lot," he says slowly. "Flying under the radar, crossing borders undetected. It's not that simple." Emilio nods approvingly, mistaking Frank's hesitation for fear. Frank continues, feigning interest. "How many shipments? What's the weight?" Fuel stops. He asks questions, pretending to calculate logistics. But in reality, he's buying time, observing, listening. Miguel, however, remains skeptical. He studies Frank, his gut telling him this old man isn't as harmless as he looks. "You've got that look," Miguel murmurs. "The kind that's seen war." Frank doesn't answer. He just smirks. Suddenly, Frank's mind drifts. Gunfire tears through the jungle. His unit is pinned down, radioing desperately for extraction. Frank, piloting his Black Hawk helicopter, dives through enemy fire like a ghost in the wind. Missiles streak past, bullets riddle the fuselage, but he never wavers. He hovers just long enough for his men to climb aboard, then jerks the chopper skyward, leaving fire and bodies behind. "You're insane, Hawk," his co-pilot yells. Frank looks from Emilio to Miguel, as if considering the offer laid out before him. "You're asking a lot," he says slowly, his voice steady yet laced with an undercurrent of tension. "Flying under the radar, crossing borders undetected. It's not that simple." Emilio nods approvingly, mistaking Frank's hesitation for fear, a sign that he's intimidated by the daunting task ahead. The Kingpin sees an opportunity, a potential ally who might help solidify his empire's grip on the drug trade. "We've got it all planned out, old man," he boasts. "You'll be well compensated, and I can assure you, it'll be worth your while." Frank continues, feigning interest, letting the wheels of deception turn in his mind. "How many shipments? What's the weight?" Fuel stops. He peppers them with questions, pretending to calculate logistics as if he's weighing the pros and cons of the job. But in reality, he's buying time, observing, listening, and absorbing every detail of his surroundings. He takes mental notes of the cartel's operations, the layout of the airstrip, and the demeanor of the men around him. Knowledge is power, and he intends to gather as much as possible before making his next move. Miguel, however, remains skeptical. The younger man studies Frank intently, his instincts honed by years of working in the ruthless world of drug trafficking. "You've got that look," Miguel murmurs, narrowing his eyes. "The kind that's seen war." There's a challenge in his tone, a silent accusation that hints at Frank's hidden depths. Frank doesn't answer. He simply smirks, allowing the moment to linger. He knows the game he's playing, the masks they all wear. They see an old man, but beneath that exterior lies a soldier forged in the fires of combat. He's not afraid of Miguel's scrutiny. Rather, he relishes it, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, Frank's mind drifts, and he's no longer in the cartel's lair. He's back in the jungle, the air thick with the sounds of gunfire tearing through the dense foliage. His unit is pinned down, desperate radio calls echoing in his ears as they plead for extraction. The chaos is palpable, bullets whizzing by like angry hornets, and the weight of responsibility hangs heavy on his shoulders. In the cockpit of his Black Hawk helicopter, Frank feels the familiar rush of adrenaline as he dives through enemy fire, a ghost in the wind. The shrill scream of missiles streaking past him is drowned out by the thundering beat of his heart. Bullets riddle the fuselage, ricocheting off the metal with deadly precision, but he never wavers. His focus is razor-sharp, every instinct screaming at him to press forward. He hovers just long enough for his men to climb aboard, adrenaline surging through him as he glances down at the chaos below. They're relying on him, and failure is not an option. With a swift jerk, he yanks the chopper skyward, leaving fire and bodies behind as he ascends into the safety of the sky. "You're insane, Hawk," his co-pilot yells, a mix of awe and fear in his voice. Frank's lips curl into a confident grin as he replies, "Sometimes, insane is the only way to get the job done." That mantra has served him well throughout his career, and as he recalls the faces of the men he saved that day, it only reinforces his resolve. He's a survivor, a warrior who knows how to navigate chaos, and he'll use that to his advantage once more. Back in the present, the moment of nostalgia fades, and Frank's attention snaps back to Emilio and Miguel. The stakes are high, but so is his determination. If they think they've captured a mere pilot, they are about to learn just how dangerous a seasoned soldier can be when backed into a corner. The game has begun, and Frank intends to turn the tables, striking when they least expect it. Frank just grins. Insane gets the job done. Back in the present, his old instincts kick in. He analyzes the room, memorizing exits, guards' movements, weapons within reach. The cartel has no idea who they've captured. 4 days, Frank is kept under tight surveillance. Guards follow his every move, but they underestimate him. He watches their routines, notes shift changes. He overhears cartel pilots discussing flight plans and safe zones, memorizing key locations. Then, one night, he spots something, a rusted combat knife, left forgotten on a crate. He walks past it casually, but his fingers itch. Old habits die hard. The time comes. Emilio orders a test flight to ensure Frank can smuggle the cargo undetected. They load a small plane with merchandise and tell him to prove his loyalty. Frank climbs into the cockpit, his face expressionless. 30 minutes into the flight, he makes his move. He loosens a fuel line, causing a slow but inevitable leak. Frank just grins, a flicker of defiance lighting up his weary eyes. Insane gets the job done, he quips, recalling the countless missions that had pushed him to the brink. His reputation as a pilot and a soldier had been forged in the fires of chaos, and now, as he finds himself in enemy territory, those same instincts begin to stir once more. Back in the present, his old instincts kick in with a vengeance. Frank quickly analyzes the room, his sharp gaze taking in every detail. He memorizes exits, noting guards' movements, scanning for weapons within reach. The cartel has no idea who they've captured. To them, he's just an old man, a washed-up pilot with nothing left to lose. They underestimate him, and that's their greatest mistake. 4 days, Frank is kept under tight surveillance. Guards follow his every move, thinking they're in control, but they underestimate him. He watches their routines closely, notes shift changes, and learns their habits like a predator stalking its prey. In the dim light of his confinement, he overhears cartel pilots discussing flight plans and safe zones, memorizing key locations that could prove invaluable. The nights are long, but Frank remains patient, calculating his every move. Then, one fateful evening, he spots something, a rusted combat knife, left forgotten on a crate in the corner of the room. It glints in the low light, a remnant of a past life filled with combat and survival. He walks past it casually, but his fingers itch at the sight. Old habits die hard, and the urge to arm himself is almost overwhelming. The time finally comes when Emilio, eager to test his new asset, orders a test flight to ensure Frank can smuggle the cargo undetected. The cartel has plans to move a shipment across the border, and they need to see if he can handle the task. It's a gamble, but one that Emilio is willing to take. They load a small plane with merchandise, stacks of cash and tightly wrapped packages, and tell Frank to prove his loyalty. The weight of the cargo feels familiar, a reminder of the many missions he has undertaken in the past. As he climbs into the cockpit, his face remains expressionless, a mask of calm hiding the storm brewing inside. 30 minutes into the flight, Frank feels the familiar hum of the engines beneath him, the vibrations resonating through the fuselage. It's a comforting sensation, but he knows that comfort is a luxury he cannot afford. He's aware that this is his chance to escape, to turn the tables on those who thought they had him trapped. With deft movements, he loosens a fuel line, causing a slow but inevitable leak. The smell of gasoline fills the cockpit, mingling with the adrenaline surging through his veins. He keeps his breathing steady, his heart pounding in his chest as he glances at the instruments. Everything is in order: altitude, speed, direction. But he knows it won't last. "Mayday! Mayday!" He radios in, his voice calm but urgent. "Losing altitude. Gotta put her down." The words roll off his tongue effortlessly, a practiced performance masking the chaos within. He can almost hear the guards panic as they scramble to respond, their disbelief palpable. As the plane begins to sputter, Frank feels a surge of exhilaration. He maneuvers it as best as he can, aiming for an uninhabited stretch of desert. The engine coughs and splutters, each noise echoing his heartbeat. He knows that the crash will be spectacular, a smoke screen for his escape. The ground rushes up to meet him, and in that split second, Frank braces for impact. The plane crashes violently in the desert, the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass echoing across the barren landscape. Flames erupt around him as he emerges from the wreckage, the heat searing his skin. By the time the cartel's men arrive, they find only wreckage and flames, no sign of Frank Reynolds. They search the area frantically, their shouts blending into the chaos. But it's too late. The old soldier has vanished into the night, leaving behind nothing but ashes and smoke. The cartel assumes him dead, but they are dead wrong. Frank doesn't run. He never does. Instead, he circles back, years of military survival training kicking in as he melts into the darkness. He stalks the cartel's men like a predator waiting for the perfect moment, each step deliberate, each breath measured. One guard wanders too far from the others, a swift strike with a combat knife, and he's gone. His body left slumped against a crate. Frank is a ghost, moving through the shadows, ready to reclaim what is his. The game has changed, and now he is the hunter once more, driven by a fierce determination to bring down the empire that thought it could break him. Mayday! Mayday! He radios in, voice calm but urgent. Losing altitude. Gotta put her down. The plane crashes in the desert. By the time the cartel's men arrive, they find only wreckage and flames. No sign of Frank Reynolds. The cartel assumes him dead, but they are dead wrong. Frank doesn't run. He never does. Instead, he circles back. Years of military survival training kick in as he melts into the darkness, stalking the cartel's men like a predator waiting for the perfect moment. One guard wanders too far from the others, a swift strike with a combat knife, and he's gone. His body left slumped against a crate, they load a small plane with merchandise, the term chillingly euphemistic for the illicit cargo it carries. The cartel's men surround Frank, their eyes sharp with suspicion, commanding him to prove his loyalty. With a nod, he climbs into the cockpit, his face expressionless, a mask carefully crafted to hide the storm brewing inside. He knows. This flight isn't just a test of skill, it's a gambit in a deadly game. As the small aircraft lifts off the ground and ascends into the vast blue sky, Frank's mind races. The chatter of the cartel's men fades into the background as he focuses on his plan. 30 minutes into the flight, he makes his move. With practiced precision, he loosens a fuel line, allowing a slow but inevitable leak to begin. He glances at the fuel gauge, watching it drop, knowing the seconds are ticking away before chaos ensues. Mayday! Mayday! He radios in, his voice calm but urgent. Losing altitude. Gotta put her down. The transmission crackles through the static, and he can almost hear the disbelief on the other end. But Frank knows the stakes, and his heart races with adrenaline as he prepares for the next phase of his escape. The plane crashes in the desert, a cacophony of metal and fire, the sound echoing against the arid landscape as flames erupt around the wreckage. It's a controlled chaos, designed to ensure he is presumed dead. By the time the cartel's men arrive, they find only wreckage and flames, the scent of burnt metal and fuel hanging heavily in the air. There's no sign of Frank Reynolds, no trace of the man they thought they had coerced into their service. The cartel assumes him dead, but they are dead wrong. Frank doesn't run. He never does. Instead, he circles back, using the shadows of the desert to his advantage. Years of military survival training kick in as he melts into the darkness, becoming a ghost among the dunes, stalking the cartel's men like a predator lying in wait. One guard wanders too far from the others, perhaps emboldened by their assumed victory. This is the moment Frank has been waiting for. He moves swiftly, silently, the weight of his combat knife feeling familiar in his hand. With a swift strike, he dispatches the guard, his body collapsing silently against a crate. There's no time for hesitation or remorse. Frank knows the consequences of failure all too well. One by one, he picks off the cartel members, each kill a calculated decision rooted in his training and instincts. The men are unaware that the old pilot they underestimated is now their worst nightmare, a phantasm of vengeance in the darkness. With every silent strike, Frank's confidence grows, fueled by the knowledge that he's not just fighting for his life. He's reclaiming the power that the cartel sought to strip from him. The air thickens with tension, the desert a silent witness to the unfolding drama. Frank moves like a whisper, a shadow blending seamlessly into the landscape. He lays traps, using the environment to his advantage, placing rocks to cause a stumble, creating distractions to draw their attention away from his position. He becomes the very embodiment of stealth, a master of his craft. In the dead of night, as the moon casts an eerie glow over the desert, the remaining cartel guards are left oblivious to the storm brewing around them. Frank's eyes narrow as he stalks closer, assessing their movements, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Each heartbeat is a reminder of the stakes involved. He's not just reclaiming his freedom. He's sending a message to Emilio Vargas that the hunter has become the hunted. With the desert's winds whispering through the night, Frank prepares for the final phase of his mission, taking the fight to the heart of the cartel's operations and reclaiming the life they sought to take from him. The night is his ally, and under its cover, he will turn the tide, one cartel guard at a time. Another cartel soldier hears a noise, turns too late. Frank's garrote tightens around his throat until the struggling stops. "Where the hell is everyone?" A panicked voice crackles over the cartel's radios. Miguel grips his pistol tighter. Something isn't right. This wasn't some old, stubborn pilot refusing to back down. This was a ghost. Find him. Now. Miguel barks, but even he feels it now. The hunter has become the hunted. The jungle feels different now. The air is thick with something unseen but undeniable. Fear. Miguel, El Lobo, Santiago was never afraid of a fight. He'd broken men with his bare hands, watched them beg for mercy before pulling the trigger. But this was something else entirely. His men were disappearing, one by one. No screams, no gunfire, just silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of static on the radio, followed by dead air. He turns to the nearest soldier, eyes burning with urgency. Stay together. No one moves alone. But the order comes too late. A rustle in the foliage. A strangled gasp. Miguel whirls around, gun raised, only to find another one of his men slumped against a tree, a jagged slash across his throat. The jungle swallows the body whole, branches shifting like skeletal fingers, erasing all evidence of the kill. This isn't a fight. It's a purge. Damn it! Miguel hisses, sweat rolling down his brow. Where is he? The men fan out, scanning the darkness with shaking hands. The sounds of the jungle, chirping insects, distant howls, seem to mock them. Then, a whisper, a breath against the back of a soldier's neck. Before he can even cry out, a blade flashes. Quick, clean, efficient. He crumples to the ground, his rifle clattering beside him. Miguel's pulse hammers in his ears. This was no old, washed-up pilot. This was something far worse. El Fantasma, one of the remaining men mutters, barely above a breath. The ghost. Miguel snarls, shaking off the creeping dread. He's just a man, he growls. And men bleed. Maybe. But tonight, in the heart of the jungle, Frank Reynolds isn't a man. He's death itself. Frank moves with precision, making his way toward a hidden weapons cache deep in the cartel's compound. Inside, he finds exactly what he needs: military-grade explosives, an M16 rifle, and enough ammunition to start a war. The roar of approaching vehicles fills the airstrip. Emilio Vargas steps out, his face twisted in rage. Beside him, Miguel cracks his knuckles, his eyes scanning for movement. "Come out, old man. Let's end this." Emilio shouts. Silence. Then, a single gunshot. Miguel staggers back, his chest blossoming red. His gun clatters to the ground, his body hitting the dirt a second later. "Find him. Now!" Miguel barks, his voice cutting through the tense air like a knife. His words echo in the dimly lit corridors of the cartel's compound, but even he feels it now. The hunter has become the hunted. The air is thick with anticipation, and a primal fear grips the men around him. They know that Frank Hawk Reynolds is not just an old man. He is a formidable opponent, a spectre haunting their every move. As Frank moves with precision, each step calculated and deliberate, he navigates through the labyrinth of the cartel's territory. Years of military training guide him as he makes his way toward a hidden weapons cache deep within the compound, his senses heightened, attuned to every sound and shadow. The adrenaline courses through his veins, sharpening his focus, drowning out the chaos of his surroundings. Inside the cache, he finds exactly what he needs: military-grade explosives, an M16 rifle, and enough ammunition to start a war. The weapons gleam under the flickering fluorescent lights, a testament to the cartel's ruthless ambitions. Frank gathers his gear quickly, knowing time is of the essence. He straps the rifle across his back, feeling the comforting weight of it against him, a reminder that he is no longer a man on the run. He is now a force to be reckoned with. Suddenly, the roar of approaching vehicles fills the airstrip, drowning out the whispers of the night. The sound reverberates through the compound, an ominous herald of the storm that is about to break. Frank takes a deep breath, steadying himself as he moves to a vantage point, ready to face whatever comes next. Emilio Vargas steps out of one of the SUVs, his face twisted in rage, a cruel sneer plastered across his features. The man is a kingpin, a warlord who has built his empire on fear and bloodshed. But tonight, he stands at the precipice of his downfall. Beside him, Miguel cracks his knuckles, his eyes scanning for movement, a predatory instinct flaring within him. The cartel men flanking them shift restlessly, their nerves electrified as they sense the tension in the air. "Come out, old man. Let's end this," Emilio shouts, his voice laced with a mix of bravado and desperation. He knows Frank is here. He can feel it in his bones. The challenge hangs heavy in the air, a direct call to confront the ghost of his past. Silence falls, thick and oppressive, stretching out like an eternity. The night seems to hold its breath, and for a moment, it feels as if the world has paused. Emilio's gaze hardens, frustration boiling within him. He has dealt with many foes before, but this one is different. Frank is not just another target. He is a symbol of everything Emilio has sought to eliminate, a reminder of the sacrifices made to build his empire. Then, without warning, a single gunshot pierces the stillness. Miguel staggers back, his eyes wide with shock as he clutches his chest. The blossoming red stains his shirt, spreading rapidly like a dark flower unfurling in the night. His gun clatters to the ground, the metallic sound echoing like a death knell in the tense silence. Miguel's body hits the dirt a second later, life extinguished in an instant, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Emilio's eyes narrow, fury igniting within him as he turns to search for the source of the shot. "Miguel!" he screams, his voice raw with panic and rage. He rushes to his fallen comrade, kneeling beside him, desperately checking for any signs of life. But it's too late. The reality of betrayal crashes down on him like a wave, and he knows that they have underestimated Frank. The remaining cartel guards exchange frantic glances, their bravado slipping away in the face of this unexpected turn of events. They instinctively move closer to Emilio, eyes darting into the shadows, searching for the predator that has turned the tables on them. Frank, still hidden in the darkness, allows himself a moment of satisfaction. The element of surprise is his ally, and he knows he must use it wisely. The stakes have never been higher, and he is prepared to unleash hell upon those who dared to threaten his peace. This is not just about survival, it's about reclaiming his life, his dignity, and putting an end to Emilio Vargas's reign of terror. As Emilio rises, his expression morphs from panic to fury, a tempest of emotions raging within him. He stands, surveying the compound with newfound resolve, a leader rallying his troops. "We find him. Now," he barks, his voice crackling with authority. "We'll make him pay for this." But Frank is already on the move again, his instincts guiding him through the maze of crates and barrels. He knows the layout of this place better than they do. He has been preparing for this moment for years. Each step is calculated, each breath steady, as he prepares to unleash his fury upon those who have underestimated him. In the distance, the sound of sirens begins to wail, echoing through the night. The darkness is alive, pulsating with the energy of the hunt, a deadly dance between predator and prey. Frank can feel the weight of his past bearing down on him, but he refuses to let it define him. Tonight, he will remind them all that some men are not so easily forgotten. Frank never misses. Emilio's face contorts in fury as he spins toward the sniper's perch, an old watchtower overlooking the airstrip. Another shot whizzes past him, barely missing. He dives for cover, grabbing an automatic rifle and firing blindly at the tower. But Frank is already moving, He descends the tower like a phantom, slipping through the shadows until he's right behind Emilio. The fight is brutal. Emilio throws a punch. Frank deflects it, twisting the cartel boss's arm until it snaps. Emilio howls in pain, swinging wildly, but Frank is faster, sharper, more experienced. One mistake. That's all it takes. Frank's military knife flashes, a deep, precise strike to Emilio's gut. The cartel kingpin staggers, choking on his own blood. His empire, his power, everything crumbles in an instant. "You should have left me alone," Frank whispers. Emilio falls. His reign ends in a pool of blood. Without their leader, panic sets in. Cartel members scramble to escape, some dropping their weapons, others racing for their cars. Frank walks through the wreckage, his rifle at his side, silent, steady, unchanged. This wasn't revenge. And for Frank "Hawk" Reynolds, the war never truly ends. The jungle hums with chaos. Smoke curls from burning vehicles, casting eerie shadows in the moonlight. Screams echo in the distance as cartel gunmen flee into the trees, their courage evaporating with every gunshot. Frank barely notices. His focus is on Emilio. The cartel kingpin gasps, hands pressed to his stomach, blood oozing through his fingers. His breath comes in shallow, ragged pulls. He was untouchable once, powerful, feared. Now, he's just another dying man in the dirt. Frank kneels beside him, voice low. "You picked the wrong man to threaten." Emilio tries to speak, maybe a plea, maybe a curse, but all that comes out is a wet, gurgling sound. Frank watches him, unblinking. There's no satisfaction, no triumph, just necessity. Emilio shudders one last time. Then, stillness. Frank wipes his blade clean. The jungle hums with the sounds of the night. Distant insects, the rustle of unseen creatures, the whisper of the wind through the trees. The world moves on, indifferent to the death of a man who once ruled with an iron fist. Frank exhales, watching as the light fades from Emilio's eyes. There's no glory in this, no righteous victory. Just another name added to the long list of men who thought they were invincible. The cartel soldiers who remain hesitate, their loyalty dissolving in the face of their leader's corpse. Some drop their weapons and flee, disappearing into the jungle like ghosts. Others linger, uncertainty and fear written across their faces. Frank straightens, his grip on the knife still firm. Anyone else? Silence. Then, one by one, the remaining men back away, their fear outweighing their thirst for vengeance. Without Emilio, they are nothing, a headless snake writhing in the dirt. Frank wipes the blade clean on Emilio's expensive shirt before slipping it back into its sheath. His work here is done. He turns and walks away, stepping over the fallen without a second glance. Behind him, the jungle reclaims the battlefield. Blood seeps into the earth, the dead swallowed by the darkness. Emilio Vargas ruled through fear, but fear is fleeting, and tonight, his empire crumbles, fading into legend. The king is dead. The empire burns. He moves through the remains of the airstrip, stepping over bodies, past cartel soldiers who surrendered, their weapons discarded. Some of them look at him in terror. They don't beg for mercy. They know better. Ghost team finishes securing the area. No loose ends. No threats left standing. One of them, Decker, approaches. What now, Hawk? Frank exhales. The night is cool, but his blood is still hot from the fight. He looks at the horizon, where the first hints of dawn creep in. There's always another war, he mutters. Decker nods. He understands. Men like them, they don't retire. They fade into the shadows until duty calls again. Frank glances at his plane, his old plane, still standing tall amidst the destruction. It's time to go. He steps into the cockpit, his fingers brushing the worn leather of the controls. One last job, one last mission, and then the engines roar to life, drowning out the ghosts that whisper in his ear. And just like that, Frank Reynolds disappears into the sky, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert. Frank pulled into the driveway of his small home. The familiar creak of the wooden steps greeted him as he made his way to the porch, each step a reminder of the battles he had fought, both external and internal. Inside, he paused for a moment, absorbing the stillness of his surroundings. The air was thick with memories of past lives, but tonight, it felt different, quieter, almost reverent. He sank into his old rocking chair, the wood groaning under his weight, and looked out at the land he had fought to protect. Just as he settled into a moment of peace, his phone buzzed on the table beside him. Frank picked it up, squinting at the screen. The name that flashed across was one he hadn't seen in years. Jim. Frank answered, a slight smile forming. Hawk, you're still breathing, huh? Barely, Frank replied, his voice steady. Word travels fast. Heard about your little adventure. You did good, my friend. Frank sighed, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. I didn't want it to come to that, Jim. But they left me no choice. Sometimes, there's no choice. We both know that. Frank leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. The night air carried the distant hum of crickets, the scent of rain-soaked earth. On the other end of the line, Jim exhaled. You ever get tired of this? Frank chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Tired? Sure. Done? Never. A pause. Then, Jim's voice turned serious. You should disappear for a while, Hawk. Lay low. The kind of noise you just made, it doesn't go unnoticed. Frank knew that already. He'd spent enough years in the shadows to recognize when they started closing in. Yeah, he murmured. Got a place in mind. Jim scoffed. Knowing you, middle of nowhere, no neighbors, and enough firepower to hold off an army. Frank smirked. You know me too well. Silence stretched between them, comfortable, understanding. Then Jim spoke again, softer this time. Take care of yourself, Hawk. You too, old friend. Frank ended the call and set the phone down. The stars above burned bright, indifferent to the wars waged below. He closed his eyes. He would rest. For now. Silence hung between them for a moment, the weight of their shared history heavy in the air. You're not just an old pilot anymore. You've done what you had to do, Jim continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. You protected what was yours. I admire that. Frank took a deep breath, contemplating Jim's words. It's not about admiration. I just did what needed to be done. Still, it takes guts, Hawk. You're a survivor." With that, the conversation drifted, as they reminisced about the old days, the camaraderie forged in the fires of war, and the bonds that had shaped their lives. After hanging up, Frank sat alone in the fading light, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The weight of the fight lingered, but he wasn't afraid. He never had been. It was a truth that coursed through him, reminding him that he had survived not just the war but the aftermath that came with it. He glanced around his home, where remnants of his past adorned the walls, pictures of friends, faded medals, and mementos that told stories of a life well lived. Each object was a reminder of the sacrifices made, the lives lost, and the strength it took to keep moving forward. "I never wanted this fight," he murmured to himself, the sound barely breaking the silence. Yet deep down, he understood that the fight was a part of him, woven into the very fabric of his being. He had learned to stand his ground, to face adversity head-on, and to protect those he loved. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a breathtaking reminder of nature's beauty even amidst chaos. Frank took a deep breath, allowing the stillness to wash over him. As the last rays of sunlight kissed the desert, Frank settled deeper into his chair, feeling the warmth of the day slip away. He looked out at the vast expanse of land before him, a land he had fought for, and loved fiercely. With every sunset, he was reminded of his fallen brothers, those who had stood beside him in battle, who had fought valiantly, and who had never returned home. Each name echoed in his mind, each face a haunting memory of sacrifice. "Some men never stop flying," he whispered, feeling the weight of those words settle in his heart. The breeze carried the scent of dry earth and distant rain, a whisper of things long gone. Frank's fingers traced the edge of a faded photograph resting on the table beside him. A younger version of himself stood in the picture, flanked by men whose laughter still echoed in his mind. Some were gone now, buried in places no one would ever visit, their names etched only in the memories of those who had survived. Frank exhaled slowly, the weight of time pressing on his chest. The past never truly left. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the way his body ached when the cold set in. A sudden gust of wind rattled the chimes outside his door, pulling him back to the present. His gaze shifted to the horizon, where the last traces of daylight surrendered to the oncoming night. Even in the stillness, he could feel it, an unspoken warning carried on the wind, the kind of quiet that came before a storm. His phone buzzed again, the sound cutting through the silence. Frank hesitated before reaching for it, his instincts screaming that whatever waited on the other end of the line would drag him back into the fight. Some men never stop flying, and some wars never truly end. He understood now that the war may have ended, but battles would continue to arise. Some wars never truly concluded, they simply shifted forms, evolving into new challenges. He closed his eyes, envisioning the faces of his brothers in arms, their laughter and their courage fueling his spirit. They had taught him that strength comes not just from brute force, but from resolve, from standing firm in the face of adversity, and from knowing when to fight and when to walk away. The darkness crept in around him, the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, each one a reminder of the countless lives lost, the countless stories untold. Frank felt a sense of peace wash over him, a calm acceptance of his journey. Some wars never end, he continued, his voice a quiet mantra. But I will always be ready. The night wrapped its arms around him, and as Frank sat in the cool evening air, he knew that no matter what came next, he was equipped to handle it. His past, filled with pain and valor, had shaped him into the man he had become, a survivor, a fighter, a guardian. The sun had set, but in his heart, the fire of his spirit burned bright. Frank Hawk Reynolds would always be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, prepared to defend what mattered most, even if it meant taking to the skies once more. In the dim light of a cramped, smoke-filled room somewhere in Mexico, a shadowy figure leaned over a cluttered table, the flickering light casting eerie shapes against the walls. A broken phone lay on the surface, its screen cracked and stained with remnants of a violent past. The figure's hand reached out, hesitating for just a moment before picking it up, fingers brushing against the cold, metallic surface. With a steady breath, the figure pressed the button to connect the call, the dial tone echoing ominously in the silence. "Tell me, who killed Emilio Vargas?" The voice on the other end was calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge, an undercurrent of menace that sent a shiver down the figure's spine. "I don't know," the figure replied, a hint of nervousness betraying their bravado. "But the word is he was taken out by an old pilot, Frank Reynolds." A moment of silence hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with possibility. The sun had set, but in his heart, the fire of his spirit burned bright. Frank Hawk Reynolds would always be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, prepared to defend what mattered most, even if it meant taking to the skies once more. The shadows of his past may have haunted him, but they would never extinguish the resolve that ignited within him whenever he faced adversity. In the dim light of a cramped, smoke-filled room somewhere in Mexico, a shadowy figure leaned over a cluttered table, the flickering light casting eerie shapes against the walls. The air was thick with the stench of cheap cigars and the remnants of desperate conversations. A broken phone lay on the surface, its screen cracked and stained with remnants of a violent past, proof of the brutal life that surrounded this place. The figure's hand reached out, hesitating for just a moment before picking it up, fingers brushing against the cold, metallic surface, its very existence a reminder of the danger that lurked outside. With a steady breath, the figure pressed the button to connect the call, the dial tone echoing ominously in the silence of the room. Each beep resonated like a heartbeat, quickening the tension as anticipation hung heavily in the air. Finally, a voice answered, a voice that cut through the darkness, cold and calculating. "Tell me, who killed Emilio Vargas?" The voice on the other end was calm, yet there was an unmistakable edge, an undercurrent of menace that sent a shiver down the figure's spine. It was the voice of someone who had seen too much, someone who wielded power and influence with a casual cruelty that demanded respect and fear in equal measure. "I don't know," the figure replied, a hint of nervousness betraying their bravado, the words escaping their lips like a confession. "But the word is he was taken out by an old pilot, Frank Reynolds." As soon as the name left their mouth, a moment of silence hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with possibility. It was as if the universe itself paused, holding its breath in anticipation of the repercussions that would follow. The figure could almost feel the weight of the callous gaze on the other end, assessing, calculating. They could picture the person listening, someone shrouded in darkness, eyes gleaming with unholy ambition, already plotting their next move. An old pilot? The voice was laced with incredulity, a hint of amusement dancing beneath the surface. And you think this man has the guts to stand against us? The figure's pulse quickened, every instinct screaming that they had crossed a line. He's not just any old man. He's a legend. The voice interrupted, cutting through the tension like a knife. A ghost from a war long gone. But legends can be shattered, and ghosts can be banished. A chill ran down the figure's spine. They felt the noose tightening, the reality of the situation settling in like a heavy weight on their chest. You don't understand. He's not like the others. He's trained, experienced. He's a fading memory. The voice interjected once more, impatience seeping through the calm facade. Emilio Vargas was a fool, but he was my fool. I will not let his death go unanswered. You will find this Frank Reynolds, and you will bring him to me. Understand? The command was sharp, uncompromising, a directive that left no room for dissent. The figure nodded, though the person on the other end couldn't see them. Yes, I understand, they replied, their voice a whisper in the thickening air, their mind racing with thoughts of the danger ahead. Good, came the response, the voice now dripping with ominous finality. Remember, failure is not an option. Do not return until you have his head. The call ended abruptly, the line going dead with a finality that echoed through the cramped room. The figure placed the phone back on the table, their hand trembling slightly as the reality of the order sank in. They were now entangled in a web of violence and vengeance, a pawn in a game far larger than they had anticipated. Outside, the darkness loomed heavy, a shroud that concealed the violent world that existed beyond the walls of their sanctuary. The figure took a moment to steady their breath, their mind racing as they contemplated their next move. They knew Frank Reynolds was a man to be reckoned with, but they were also acutely aware of the stakes involved. As the shadowy figure stepped away from the table, a single thought consumed them. They had awakened a beast, and now they had to hunt him down before he hunted them. The cycle of violence never truly ends, and in this game of power, survival meant everything. Frank Reynolds was alive, and with each passing moment, the hunter was becoming the hunted. Frank Reynolds? The washed-up cargo pilot. The tone shifted, disbelief turning to intrigue. He's not what he seems. He's dangerous. The voice on the other end chuckled darkly, a sound devoid of warmth. Good. I like a challenge. Find him. We need to send a message, one that will be remembered. With a sharp crack, the phone was disconnected, leaving the figure standing in the murky shadows, a wave of dread washing over them. The cycle of violence, once thought to be concluded, was now poised to begin anew. The figure looked around the room, filled with remnants of the past, old photographs of Vargas, maps of territory, and the bloodied tools of a ruthless trade. It was a world that thrived on fear and intimidation, and one that was about to be stirred once again. Outside, the night was still and quiet, but deep down, the winds of change began to howl. The fragile peace that Frank had momentarily grasped was now threatened by a new adversary, one who was determined to reclaim the lost power of the cartel and exact vengeance on those who had wronged them. In a land ruled by violence, the shadows never truly recede. The whispers of retribution lingered in the air, and Frank Reynolds, despite his hard-won victory, would soon find himself facing yet another battle, one that would test his resolve and skills like never before. In the dimly lit room, the figure clenched their jaw, staring at the flickering light bulb above. The air was thick with the stench of blood and sweat, a silent testament to the empire that had once thrived within these walls. Vargas was dead. His reign had ended in violence. His body left cooling in a pool of betrayal. But power, true power, never dies. It only shifts hands. A scarred hand reached for an old photograph on the desk. In it, a younger Emilio Vargas stood beside another man, a man whose eyes burned with cold ambition. Santiago Rojas. The figure studied the name scrawled across the back of the photo. Vargas's mentor, his enforcer, the true architect of the cartel's brutality. Word had already reached him. Frank Reynolds, an old pilot, a ghost from the past, had shattered the cartel's grip in a single night. And now, there would be a reckoning. A new storm was coming, darker and more ruthless than before. Outside, the wind began to rise, rustling through the dry jungle leaves. In the distance, the faint echo of an engine rumbled, one that carried men with vengeance in their hearts and blood on their hands. Frank had won a battle, but the war was far from over. As the figure stepped into the darkness, the phone clutched tightly in their grasp. The looming threat of retribution hung over them like a storm cloud, a reminder that in this world, the cycle of violence never truly ends.